Hey guys, welcome back to Kia Garage. I'm going to be showing you how to do brakes and pads on a 2014 Kia Soul, and Ashley's going to show you how to do the rear. As you can see, we've already jacked it up, put it on jack stands, and then removed the tire.
Alright, so we've got it jacked up here. We've got a light in here just to make that a little bit easier to see. As you can see, we've turned the wheel toward the driver's side here. We're starting on the front driver's side, and that just makes getting to these bolts a little bit easier. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the caliper right there, and that is the 14mm bolts, and so Brandon's going to break those loose with the breaker bar. And you've got one on the top and the bottom of the caliper there. So he's just breaking them loose. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and swap over to our new tool that we got for Christmas and remove, again, 14mm. We're going to remove those bolts. All right, the next thing we're going to do is just, you're kind of going to pry the caliper off of the caliper bracket just a little bit. So we've got this pry bar that we just kind of slip in there. And then you want to make sure you catch that caliper as it comes off. So after you pry that up, yeah, go ahead. We're going to pull the caliper off after you've kind of broken that loose a little bit. And make sure you hang on to that real tight. And we'll use a bungee cord here, hook it on the top of the caliper, and then just up on the spring underneath there. And I think you can kind of show them. Just hook it up on the spring and let that hang down. The goal here is just to make sure that we're not stretching this brake line out too far. You want it to kind of be soft and that caliper's not hanging on the brake line itself. And that's all you got to do. So the next thing we need to do is actually remove this caliper bracket. And so what we're going to do is 17mm on the breaker bar, and there's 2 bolts on the back holding a caliper bracket on. And so we can show you there's a bolt right here on the top. Kind of, if you can see that right there, and there's another one down here just right here on the bottom. Those are both 17. We're going to break those loose with the breaker bar. You just kind of push the caliper out of the way, and when you're pulling up on something, it's a lot easier to kind of get low with the breaker bar, and then just just break that loose with a breaker bar. All right, you can use a ratchet to break these loose. However, sometimes what we end up with is a broken. You can break a ratchet by doing that. Our light fell down, so you want to just be real careful using ratchets. Nice little breaker bar, and $20-25 you can probably pick one up at the hardware store, and especially 1/2 inch. They do make some 3/8 drives as well if that's all you got for sockets, but a nice breaker bar just gives you some nice leverage and you're not breaking it up. So then 17mm on our electric ratchet, and we'll pull those bolts out. You want to, we just there's washers on the back of those. You want to make sure you hang on to them, keep them on that bolt as well. All right, now we need to remove this caliper bracket, and it just slides off, kind of twists off the same way we had the caliper itself. There we go. So this is a caliper bracket. It does have both the pads in it. We've got a couple silver clips that's going to hold the pads. We're going to replace those, and now we'll go ahead and we'll take this over and kind of show you what we do to clean that up. So before we pull the rotor off, after we've got the caliper and the caliper bracket, we just kind of got this setting up here. We'll kind of get it out of the way here for a second. It's in the back, and we're hanging by our thing there. As you can see on the front, if the rotors have never been changed before, from the factory, you're going to have some small screws that are holding the rotor on. Sometimes if people have done the job before, they may not be there. We will put them back on, but we're going to go ahead and remove those. And so the way that I do it, I've got an impact. You can use a screwdriver. Sometimes that's a little difficult. They also have some small screwdriver hammers, but I just use a little impact with a number 3 Phillips bit on it. That's a little bit larger than a number 2. So a number 3, and then we're just gonna kind of put it in there, hold in real tight, and just zip them right off. It's over there. All right, so those two screws are loose. Get those out of the way, and then that rotor should come off. So what we're going to do is turn that, just let me see the dead blow. So sometimes you can just kind of break it loose with a hammer. I've got this small dead blow that's been used a lot. We've got a couple different hammers here. You can usually just smack the outside and these will break loose. And sometimes that doesn't work. So what I'll do is just take the caliper. I'll put it on the other side for just a second. Make sure that we're not putting too much tension on that brake line. And then over here where we had the caliper itself, we just kind of smack it a few times. All right, give us just a second. There you go. We can see we kind of just broke that loose. It'll then just slide right on off. And then you can set that aside. I usually recycle these. Got a couple guys in the neighborhood that'll come by that are do some recycling. I usually stack them up and let those guys have them. So we'll stack that one aside. And we'll show you how to replace the pads here in our caliper bracket. Okay, so here we are on the bench. This is the caliper bracket when you get it taken off. And so we're going to remove the pads that are in there. They'll honestly just slide out. Just knock that out. Push that one. And they just come right out. As you can see here, this one is already down to metal. That's why our friends brought us this car. They was making a bunch of noise and we were already down to metal, which is also scratched up the rotor, which is why we're going to change that. So on the caliper bracket, there's some metal clips here that's the hold. When I buy pads, I usually go ahead and get Duralast Elite from AutoZone. Honestly, it always comes with new clips. So we're just gonna pop the old clips out. Just give them a push. They pop right out there. And then I'm just looking inside here if there's any real big rust or any buildup that we want to clean up. I'll go ahead and I've got a wire brush here on an air tool. You can use any little wire brush and just kind of hit that real quick and knock out any of that rust or corrosion. Clips come in, just need 2 of the clips. You should have 4 clips in there. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're going to come like that. 2 of them are going to be for the passenger side. The clips are just going to sit right inside this hole here, and they should just push right in. And it's going to make a liar out of me. So every once in a while they need a little bit of help. So I'm going to go ahead, if you can see here, kind of in the inside, I'm not sure how that light is. If you can see on the inside, we've got just one tab that's going to stick down. We want to make sure that's on the inside there. And I'll just set it on the bench and just use a screwdriver to push it down in there. Okay, so you will notice most brake pads when you get them have 2 different types of pads. You can kind of see the difference here. This pad material is where it's going to strike your rotor. That's what stops the car. Back of that is just support and keep it from vibrating. These little shims keep it from vibrating. We also have, I don't know what these are called. I call them tattletales. As you can see here, as your brake pad gets down to a certain level, this little piece here will start rubbing against your rotor, and that's a squeaking sound you get. So I just call them tattletales. I'm not sure that's right. So the tattletale on most cars, I'm not sure about Kia, we'll find out, will go on the inside. And so that's the part that's got the bolt side of the caliper bracket. This angle matches the same angle that exists. You can kind of see here, will match that angle on the bracket. All right, so we got that inside, the tattletales on the inside of that caliper bracket, and then we just do the same on the other side. Set the pad in, pad material to the middle, shim and stuff on the outside. So once you're done, you should have the pads inside back in the bracket with the new clips. Try to push them out to the outside as far as you can, but they need to stay put because then we're going to slip this back on over the new rotor. So let's go ahead and open up our new rotors. Now, before you go taking this plastic off, I always recommend just checking and making sure that the rotors are the same size, which these two are, that's outer diameter, as well as, just double checking. I've got 5 lug nut holes, the 2 holes for the screws that we took out, making sure that everything's about the same there. It's not a bad idea to also make sure that this inner hub is about the same as well. They don't have to be perfect because it's the lugs that are going to come through. So this looks about right. All right, so here we are back over by the car, and we're just going to take the new rotor and slip it back over the hub. You want to try to keep your greasy hands off of the braking surface as much as possible. Grease and braking always usually don't go together well. So when we do put this on, you want to line up the 2 holes. If you recall the 2 holes that had the screws, we want to line those up to the screw holes in the hub itself.
There we go.
You can see the 2 holes here?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to put these screws back in that we took off. It's going to hold the rotor on. So we just, for us here, we just get them put in there, get a couple threads on, but by hand if you can. If you need to use a screwdriver, go ahead. You always want to be careful using a tool starting a screw. You never want to strip it out. So we just get them started, and then we'll grab the impact and push in real tight. You don't want to strip these things out. And just give it a little bump, tighten those right in. That's it. All right. All right, so we have the caliper bracket here. As you can see, when you take a look at a caliper bracket, we've got bolts on one side, and those you just want to put on the inside of the rotor and slip it right over the outside of the rotor the way it came off. Maybe easier, just to get it in there. All right, then you just kind of hold it with one hand so it doesn't fall off. We don't want to be breaking our new pads. And take the large 17 millimeter, well, they're not 17, the large bolts. Make sure you got the washer on there. Get those started in the caliper bracket. So you kind of got to move the caliper bracket, maybe rotate the rotor just a little bit to get those started. Make sure you get a couple, 3-4 turns on there. It's kind of what we do. I usually find it's sometimes a little bit difficult to get one of the bolts started. So once you get one started, the other one will line up pretty well. Sometimes it's a little bit tight. Again, make sure you got the washer on there. And you want to always start a bolt with your hands. I had an old teacher back in the day that told me if you're man enough to strip a bolt with your hands, then you can go ahead and do that. But it's pretty impossible for a person to strip. So those are started 3 or 4 turns with our hand. And now we'll go ahead and grab our ratchet and tighten those down. Don't stop, just tighten it up. All right. We're going to go ahead and just use our breaker bar and our 17 millimeter just to make sure that we've got that tight on there. Electric ratchets aren't always the craziest, and so you don't. Now this isn't the time where we're trying to kill a bolt. If you have a torque wrench, you can go ahead and look up the torque specs and figure out what the torque specs are. But we're just tightening those up, giving them nice and snug. Because you don't want a caliper bracket coming loose driving down the road. See if I can get our flashlight to hang back up here. Just stop a second, please, so that my hands are out of the way. All right. Yeah, that's good. Not too much leverage, just enough to snug it up. If you're using your ratchet, you might need a little more leverage than you would on a breaker bar, but you're just snugging, and that should do it. All right. So next thing we need to do is go ahead and put our caliper up. Just set your caliper up on top of your rotor and turn it so the brake line is facing inward on the car. All right, let's go ahead and pull that strap off. All right, so what we need to do now, if you're not familiar with how brakes work, here we go. Little lesson. This is the piston right here. And so the brake fluid fills up this cavity, and when you push on your pedal, it pushes this piston out toward my hand here, and that's what squeezes the two pads together around that rotor. So what we need to do now is take this piston and push it back inside the caliper itself, kind of widening this spot here, so that the pads, it'll slip back over the new pads. New pads are thicker than old pads, and so we just got to make room for them right now. All right, there's a few different ways to push this piston back in. Old rancher trick that I learned growing up. You could take one of your old pads, and you can see where that piston pushed up against the shim here. You can set that old pad right back in there. If you've got a large C-clamp, you just take that C-clamp and you can open them up. Be real careful on the back that you're not grabbing the banjo bolt. You don't want to grab that brake hose at all. And you can just set your C-clamp kind of right here, crank that down, pushing against the pad, and that'll push the piston back in. Okay, so before we start pushing that piston back in, what that's going to do when you push the piston back into the caliper itself, we're moving brake fluid back into the system itself, and we need to give it a place to go without causing pressure. So what we're going to do is you're going to pop the hood on your Kia. On this model here, you got your battery right here. Looks like the PCM right behind it. Right there to the left is that white looking brake fluid reservoir. We're going to take that cap off right there, and I'm just going to set that on top of the battery for right now. It does look, if you were to look here, it looks like the fluid might be a little bit low. It's between min and max, so we're okay. We're not going to put fluid in right now, because what we're going to do is we push that piston back into the caliper. That's going to move brake fluid back into the system and begin to fill that reservoir back up. So we just want to relieve that pressure so that we're not causing pressure in the system right now the way we're going to do that. So let's go ahead and push that piston in. There's a few different places you can get various tools. I've got a set that I use that kind of comes in 3 pieces. So I've got a screw, a thread, a little piece that we're going to push against. It's held on with a magnet that allows this to turn. If the other things, if this needs to stay still, it still allows my tool to turn. And then this piece just sets against the caliper to push things in, so you don't need the old pad. So this one, I just screw this down nice and tight. So you screw this on down on a ways, set that on the outside there, line up my cap on the outside of that piston. I'll just hold this with my hand for now and then turn the handle. What I'm doing then is those threads are taking this brace right here and just holding that up against the outside of the piston. And now I can just turn with my hand. If this does not turn easily with your hand, you may have a frozen piston. Maybe you forgot to open up your master cylinder there. You should be able to just, I'll hold this sometimes with my hand, sometimes it'll just stay just by itself. And I'm just easily turning, threading that in, and as you can see here, that piston is pushing right on in. Alright, when you get to the bottom there, it kind of snugs up a little bit. You don't crank it down, you don't want to break anything inside there. We're just pushing it as far as it'll go. I'll back that off just a little bit. My tool comes on out, kinda. Alright, my tool's out. Make sure I'm not twisting that up. You want that brake line to have a nice smooth flow to it, and it should just sit right back over your new brake pads. You've got your slides here that allow that caliper to move during its braking action. Make sure those are on the inside. and that caliper just goes right back on. Take your bolt that we took off with the 14 millimeter, put those right back in. Again, 3 or 4 turns with your hand. Get the one on the bottom. Same thing. Take our 14 millimeter on your ratchet. There we go. We have just completed the driver's side front pads and rotors on a 2014 Kia. You can put your tire back on, or you can just go start on the other side. We're going to go ahead and move on over to the other side.